why not just be kind?
Yeah.
What is, and I know we've covered many of these, but what is like the main thing that you're saying? This is why this is really dangerous.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's actually what I spend my days doing now with Sex Matters. So the short version is 4 words: other people have rights. So there's a stupid thing that they say in this movement, which is rights are not a pie. Or like, what does it mean to you? Like, a pie is something you divide up and then one person gets more, another person gets less. Rights really are a pie in many cases. So, one person's freedom of speech is another person's infringement of privacy. One person's privacy is another person's infringement of freedom of speech. Those are 2 human rights that collide. And often you have to weigh them up against each other. So every time a celebrity goes to court to stop the publication of paparazzi pictures, they are infringing on the freedom of speech of the press. And if they lose, the press is infringing on their privacy.
Yeah.
So that's just an example of how it is not true that human rights are not pie. Human rights are often pie, right? And some human rights depend on being able to recognise the sex of the people around you. In particular, women's privacy rights, women's safety, women's ability to recover from trauma, especially sexual trauma. Those things rely on women being able to recognise who is male and who is female and to act on that recognition. So if you are a woman who has been raped and you wish to go to a place where you can recover, and that will mean for you to be entirely male-free space, and a man says, what is it to you if I identify as a woman? It's everything to you. It's going to ruin your male-free space. And that's like a really sort of big example of it, like a really pointed example of it. But just in everyday situations, women are not safe undressing in places where men have free access. And like, you told me things I didn't know about men's changing rooms, and I now wish I hadn't known them.
How do you not know that? They make all these horrible noises, unseemly noises.
No, I didn't know that.
I just thought it was obvious about...
No, I mean, I know that men wee on the seats because I have to go into toilets after them, but I've never used a changing room that I shared with men.
Seats? I mean, what about sinks?
I know that. I know that because I've got brothers who played sport and travelled and, complained about, drunk roommates coming back in and using the sink.
Yeah.
Disgusting. Anyway, you disgusting human beings. Sorry, you're not. You're lovely. I've got sons and brothers that are all lovely people.
No, but you're right. And I know you're thinking some people go, not all men and that thing.
Yeah, I know.
But I would say to those men, first, I can't stand the other side, men who are like the man is like, oh, you men are all horrible and I'm nice. But I would say to those men, if you had to leave your daughter or girlfriend or wife or whoever it is in a room with a stranger and you don't know who it is, would you rather it be a woman or a man?
Yeah.
And if you don't want it to be with a man, why is that?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that we're all bad. Most men are lovely.
It's not a character reference to men to say I don't want them in my changing room.
Yeah.
I don't want my son in my changing room either. Like, he's a grown-up. He'd be embarrassing. Yeah. And I understand that there are cultures like Finland where that's not the case, where families do sauna naked together. I'm not Finnish.
No.
And my boundaries are my boundaries. So for women to be able to have boundaries, which is absolutely essential for women to live as full human beings with full autonomy, to be able to take full part in public life, women need to be able to say, you're male, you're not welcome in here. And if that male person says, what's it to you? I say, well, it's my rights. It's my right to privacy. It's my right to dignity. It's my safety. And on occasion, it's even more than that. Like, if you think about, like, the most extreme examples are medical examination. Yeah. So there was this extraordinary episode a year or two ago in Scotland where a bill was put forward to enable women who were reporting rape and had to have a forensics exam. So this is going to mean a vaginal exam, an uncomfortable vaginal exam, possibly an anal exam as well. Putting fingers inside you, that woman could request a forensics a specialist who is female. And the Scottish government opposed an amendment to say really female, not identifying as female, but really female. And this turned into a big debate in Holyrood, and in fact the amendment passed. But anyone who voted against it or argued against it was literally arguing that a raped woman should be forced to accept a man putting his fingers in her vagina, right? And she isn't allowed to say that is what has happened. That if she says, no, you're a man, she will either not get care, not be able to have any chance of a rape prosecution, not be able to check for internal injuries or anything like that, or she'll be called a bigot, right? That's actually an Article 3 violation in human rights terms. Article 3 is the prohibition on torture or inhuman degrading treatment. So, that's when the rubber really hits the road, when a man who says he's a woman thinks that gives him the right to do an internal examination of a raped woman.
in the name of progressive.
In the name
politics.
of progressive values. So whenever I say these things, people say, oh, you're picking the most extreme examples.
Yes.
And that is correct. But, as a mathematician, that's what you do. You look for the reductio ad absurdum, as it's called. You say, start with these premises. The premise is that what makes you a man or a woman is what you say you are. And then follow that chain of reasoning to its logical conclusion. Well, if men and women are groups that are self-defined, then you will have rapists in women's jails. You will have men winning women's sports prizes. And you will have, sure as eggs, you will have men who think it's their right to put their fingers in a woman's vagina. And she has no right to even say that's what's happening. That is just logic. You just unfold it. So I get to that point and I say, that's the reductio ad absurdum that shows me the premise was false. That's the way that a proof by contradiction works in mathematics. Start with your premise, work forward the logic, get to a point that's absurd, like in maths it's a contradiction, and then say, right, the starting premises were false.
Well, also, the same point, I think, but we have laws to protect us from the extremes.
Yes, that's correct.
People get offended, and I understand they're offended because, you think we're all going to be like that? No, I don't think you're all. I think a very, very small minority, just like probably the same number of men, I don't know, who might take advantage of things like that. We don't need laws for average Joe Bloggs attacking you because he's not going to attack you.
And then the other thing they often say is, we don't take rights away from entire groups on the basis of the behaviour of minority. Well, actually, we do. And we do in any situation where there's safeguarding. So when people say that, I know they know nothing about safeguarding. Like, actually, Peter Tatchell said this again and again in that IEA debate. And, it was so annoying. There were 5 people on the panel, including the chair. And everything he said, I wanted to just say, Peter, let me stop you right there. You don't know what you're talking about. And many points flew by. But anyway, again and again, he said this, you can't take rights away from all trans people because of the behaviour of minority. Well, think about school and safeguarding. You are not allowed to go into a school at all without going through the police checks. Schools have hard, bright lines like no adult on their own ever with a child unless the door is open. None. Not one. No male teachers go into the female spaces ever. Not one. Because as soon as you allow any loophole, well, who uses it? The pedophiles, the rapists, the groomers, whatever. So we actually do have hard, bright line rules in situations where failure is catastrophic. So when I say I don't want any men in women's spaces, no matter how those men identify, I'm not saying all men are rapists. I'm not saying, all men who identify as women are rapists. I'm just saying, I'm saying 2 things. One is I don't want them there because I'd be embarrassed. It's uncomfortable. And that's my right. But I'm also saying if I allow some of them in, guess what? The ones who want to do it are disproportionately the specific ones it's worst.
Those are the ones doing it, yeah.
So any man who oversteps women's boundaries by coming into women's spaces has already demonstrated he doesn't care about women's boundaries. He's exactly the worst sort of man to be in there.
I tell you what, as well in men's changing rooms, there is a kind of guy, loads of these men who they'll just be like drying their hair and they'll have their like genitalia
out,
right in front, and they're just saying, "Oh, I saw you're playing tennis." Like, I'm sitting down.
There's women like that too, actually.
I'm just flabbergasted. I'm like, I should not be this close to your appendage.
People vary so much on that. Like, I spend all my days, I spend so much more of my days talking about, things that I just was able to ignore when I was the finance editor of The Economist, by the way, when I read my book. Like, I still think, when I was talking about, banking regulation, I did a special report on digital banking on consumers and travelled to China and to Korea and Singapore for it while I was thinking about these issues. So bizarre, real whiplash. But I think back to the changing rooms in the building where The Economist was and still is. And there's really people who just do that. They wander around completely naked, women who wander around completely naked and they're drying their hair and they're chatting to you. And there's other people who get entirely dressed in the shower cubicle.
Yeah.
So people are really varied, but people are entitled to their own boundaries.